Hey everyone, why don't we get started? Looks like some folks are still joining us, but we'll get this kicked off. And fortunately, this training will also be recorded. So welcome to our training on the RAD Supplemental Notice 4C. Just to begin with some housekeeping notes. If you wouldn't mind remaining muted as you come in and during the presentation, we'll look forward to any discussion, any live questions after we get through the presentation. But just so we can get through a clean presentation, since we're also going to record this for folks who are unable to attend. If you have any simple questions, simple answer questions that you want to put in the chat, we've got a team monitoring that, and so you're welcome to put them in there. But we'll save any more complex questions to the end. We'll be, as I said, we'll be posting this recording, a copy of the slides on hud.gov/rad after the session. So you can also look out for that and tell your friends.
Yeah.
Okay, so diving in, yesterday, HUD announced the release of the RAD Supplemental Notice 4C. This supplemental notice makes discrete edits to the last major full revision of the RAD notice, so it's called Revision 4, that was published a few years ago. You're going to have a few key documents you want to pay attention to. First of all, there's the RAD Supplemental Notice 4C itself. It's going to admittedly be a little bit hard to read on its own because it's making discrete edits. It's changing certain sections within the RAD notice. But very shortly, we'll be publishing a version of the full RAD notice, Revision 4, as it's been amended by this supplemental notice, so you can more quickly see where the changes are. And we'll also have just a clean master copy of the RAD notice with all the amendments that have been made. This is the third amendment. So you've got a master copy to use as you're implementing RAD. HUD will also, within the next few days, hopefully, or publish a notice in the Federal Register. This is what we do with every publication of a RAD notice. We announce that it's technically necessary in order to announce that we've published this HUD notice, as well as to announce any new waivers. Because there are a few provisions in the RAD supplemental notice that are reliant on new waivers or alternative requirements, there are some provisions that will have to wait until 10 days after the publication of the Federal Register notice. So those are noted, those are going to be noted as we go through the slide deck. Okay, so broadly speaking, the supplemental notice intends to do three major things: implement some statutory changes that were made in the FY 2024 Appropriations Act, establish a waiver process to financially stabilize and better preserve high quality housing, and strengthen HUD's oversight and do some program administration streamlining, and as well as improving the resident experience in a few key areas that have been highlighted to us. In a little bit more detail, we're going to walk through the extension of the RAD application sunset date, how the continued availability of resident services will be implemented, a really important simplification of RAD Section 18 blends. We'll talk through the waiver process for rent adjustments, as well as contract renewal terms. I'm going to turn to my colleague, Carol Williams-Keefe, for that, as well as further discussion on updated underwriting requirements. I'm going to talk through some financial reporting requirements in the notice, the resident protections items, some conforming changes from HOTMA that we're making in the notice, and then the renaming of Fair Cost to RAD as Restore Rebuild. Okay, diving in. Extension of the RAD application sunset date. This one's very straightforward. Before the FY 2024 Appropriations Act, the RAD statute allowed HUD to receive new applications for public housing properties wishing to convert under RAD up until September 30th, 2024. Of course, that time has passed. Fortunately, Congress extended that date to September 30th, 2029. So this notice just updates that date, that applications can be received through September 30th, 2029. Moving on. Oop, have I moved on too far? Preserving resident services. So as our next topic, after a RAD conversion, a public housing property is no longer within the public housing program, and therefore, in some cases, public housing residents after conversion become, and as well as people who move in after conversion, they can become ineligible to participate, or that property can be ineligible to renew certain resident services programs. Congress provided us new authority in the FY 2024 Appropriations Act to waive certain statutes as necessary to ensure the ongoing availability of services to residents. So we're using that across a few important programs within the public housing in the public housing world. First of all, ROS grants will be eligible for renewal after conversion. So PHAs have always been able to finish out their ROS grant. Now they'll be able to renew the ROS grant, even though that property is now under a RAD project-based voucher contract or a RAD project-based rental assistance contract. Further, through this notice, Jobs Plus grantees will be able to continue to enroll residents in the Jobs Plus rent incentive and provide full Jobs Plus services to them after conversion. Those two last items are reliant on new waivers, so we'll need to wait a few weeks to implement, but those are coming shortly. We've simplified we've redrafted the guidance on the Family Self-Sufficiency Program, FSS, but nothing's substantively changing because after conversion, both project-based voucher properties and project-based rental assistance properties are already able to renew those grants and serve residents, fortunately. So it's just a simplification of language. We also addressed for the first time a congregate housing services program, where properties that convert to project-based rental assistance are able to continue to renew their CHSP grant. There's only about a dozen of these left in the country anyway, so this is not a major item, but still really important for those properties benefiting from these grants. Unfortunately, a property that converts to project-based vouchers would not be able to continue to renew its congregate housing services program grant, and that's due to statutory restrictions that we have. Okay, so just in summary, across all these programs, as the property converts, residents can continue to, across the board, residents can continue to benefit from the programs. Properties will be able to renew their ROS grants and their FSS grants, will be eligible to, obviously, depending on the availability of appropriations and what those NOFOs say from year to year. Jobs Plus grants don't renew anyway, they're one-time grants, and the Congregate Housing Services Program can renew if the conversion is to PBRA. Okay. Next big topic, RAD Section 18 blends. So for the last 5 or 6 years, PHAs have increasingly combined the use of RAD and Section 18 disposition authority with a RAD in a RAD transaction, what we've called a RAD Section 18 blend. The benefit is the blends allow the tenant protection voucher assistance to be project-based, and that increases the overall project revenue. Meanwhile, through changes we've made a few years ago in RAD, all residents, whether the property is coming out through RAD or through Section 18, all residents benefited from the RAD resident rights around consultation, relocation, right of return, and then some of the public housing rights that continue after conversion, such as the rights to organize and grieve adverse actions, as well as to receive advance notice prior to an adverse action, as well as other rights that we have, but those were just to name a few. Earlier, HUD notices established 2 kinds of blends: the RAD Section 18 construction blend, where a housing authority is approved for a higher number of Section 18 units and tenant protection vouchers based on the level of construction that they're performing at the property. The idea being the greater capital needs of the property, the greater the construction needs, the higher the revenue needed to support the financing to address those needs. We also had the RAD Section 18 small PHA blends. This is for PHAs with 250 or fewer units. There's a item here that's not quite right. It's unrelated to whether they perform rehab or not. A PHA with 250 units or less is eligible under the small PHA blend. So there's actually two things that happen. I want to cover one that's unrelated to the RAD supplemental notice, but 2 weeks ago, or December 2026, December 26th, PIH published a revision to their Section 18 notice that made some important expansions to blends. First of all, on the construction blends, more property types are now eligible for the highest blend percentage, and we increased the blend percentage. So any properties where they're doing rehab in excess of 90% of HUD's published housing construction costs, or where they're doing demolition and new construction, or where there's transfer of assistance. Now HUD will approve 90% of the units under Section 18. 10% of the units will convert the public housing assistance through RAD, and to create greater revenue at the property, again, to support these really significant actions, repositioning actions. Then it continues down the scale that if a property that's doing work that exceeds 60% of HUD's published housing construction costs, 60% of the units will be approved under Section 18, and at least 40% of the units will convert the public housing assistance through RAD. And then properties that exceed 30% of construction of the HUD's published housing construction costs, 30% of the units will go through Section 18, 70% will convert the public housing assistance through RAD. So hopefully you also see the nice alignment of numbers of 90-60-30 and 90-60-30 to make things slightly easier to remember, as we make mild efforts to make things simpler. Similarly, on the also important on the construction blends is we removed the requirement that, or the restriction against using 9% tax credits. We looked at all of the properties that across our experience in RAD, and saw that even properties with that were getting awards of 9% tax credits were still needing significant gap financing, and therefore also needed to benefit from these construction blends. So that's another important change made in here. For the small PHA blends, it increases the number of units that are approved under Section 18 up to 90%, much like the highest percentage in the construction blends. Then also we formalize what's called a sequenced blend. We've seen some housing authorities do this in the past, where they first receive approval under Section 18 for a property, and then instead of fully removing the property through Section 18, remove 10% of the units through RAD, convert 10% of the public housing assistance through RAD, with the main benefit of that being they're able to now bring in all of the RAD resident rights to the entire property. So we've seen a lot of jurisdictions do this really effectively, and that's not only it's doing the right thing for the residents, it's making it easier as PHAs communicate with residents about what their rights are. And oftentimes what PHAs want to be able to do, you want to be able to continue to serve those residents, make sure they can return, make sure that they're not inadvertently screened out from the Section 8 program. So it's another important change. We expect fewer PHAs to use this sequence blend, just because now we already have created some opportunities for a PHA to do 90% Section 18 and 10% RAD, but still, we think that it will be useful in some cases. Okay, so that was PIH's notice. In the supplemental notice that we published yesterday, we made a number of really important structural changes to how RAD Section 18 blends work. So the RAD, the FY 2024 Appropriations Act provided us new authority to actually convert the tenant protection voucher assistance, which means that all of the assistance coming from a blend, both the public housing assistance that's converting and the tenant protection voucher assistance can be consolidated onto one Section 8 platform, project-based voucher or project-based rental assistance, under a single RAD HAP contract with uniform rents, uniform rules, etc. So PHAs can choose to put all of the contract under a RAD project-based voucher contract or a RAD project-based rental assistance contract. This is going to be particularly useful for smaller PHAs that don't have a voucher program in the first place. All the RAD waivers and alternative requirements apply. So not only as they always have the resident rights, but also things like the rules governing the rehab and construction. So if the HAP contract is executed prior to construction, rehab assistance payments can be made to the project during construction. Inspections occur after the completion of work. Public housing funds can be used as a development source. And all the other requirements and flexibilities we've established in RAD that are meant to both protect residents while facilitating the necessary rehabilitation and construction work. And then there'll be uniform contract rents with no distinction between the units under the contract. So again, rather than have two different contracts with mostly the same but somewhat different rules, they're all going to be, all of the units will be under the same contract. Let's dive into this a little bit more. So again, previously you had two contracts. The Section 18 units had to, some units were converting through RAD and were under a RAD project-based voucher or RAD project-based rental assistance contract. But some units there, in this case, 10 units, in this fictional 25 unit property, 10 units would have rents of $800 and be under a RAD contract and follow all the RAD requirements. And you'd have 15 units under this non-RAD project-based voucher contract. They were only able to go to a project-based voucher contract because HUD issued two tenant protection vouchers to the Housing Authority. The Housing Authority project-based those vouchers. And so those units were placed under a separate contract. Now, we'll be putting all of the units, all 25 of these units, under a single contract, either PBV or PBRA, with a single weighted contract rent, in this case, $976. You'll see how we got there in a second. And all of it would be following the RAD requirements. Let's look at how the rents are set. So HUD would produce a single blended rent schedule for all units resulting from a blend. That'll be the weighted average of the converting public housing assistance. That's what we've known as the RAD rents that we publish every couple of years. We just published the 2024 RAD rents in December. So weighted average of those RAD rents and the converting TPV assistance that we're using the lower of 110% of the applicable FMR or the reasonable rent, the lower of those two numbers. So in our example, a 100-unit property under a RAD Section 18 construction blend is using a RAD Section 18 construction blend to do significant rehab. And so they're qualifying for the 60-40 blend, where 60% of the units are going under Section 18 and 40% of the units are public housing converting assistance. So we have 40 units, 60 units, that's 100 units total. The RAD rent of $800 in this case. The lower of 110% of FMR or the reasonable rent is $1,000 in this case. So that's a weighted average of $920. Oh, hold on, jumping ahead. And then on top of that, PHAs can use any of the other flexibilities we've established in the RAD notice, like the Opportunity Zone Rent Boost. NTW agencies can use their fungible resources to boost the rents. We have provision for tenant paid utility savings. When work is being done, it will reduce the cost of tenant paid utilities, and there's a boost to the rent that can result, and others. Okay, but that's just the first step. The second important thing we did is we've said we've always had this provision that a PHA, if it was receiving what's called demolition, disposition, transition funding under the capital fund from a prior Section 18 action, they can apply some of that funding to boost the RAD rents. Now for blends, what we're saying is the Section 18 units that are being approved in that very blend that would otherwise trigger DDTF is going to be canceled. It's going to be used to increase the RAD rent. So let's come back to our example of a 100-unit property using a RAD Section 18 blend, 60% going through Section 18, 40% through RAD. So the first question is, well, how much DDTF would that Section 18 approval normally trigger? So you got 60 units going through Section 18. Let's say on average, this PHA was receiving about $3,000 per unit in the capital fund per year. And the DDTF is provided over 5 years. That's a total of $1.35 million. The RAD rent, the increase to the RAD rent would be, you take that $1.35 million divided by 20, divided by the 40 RAD public housing units converting through RAD, and divided by 12 months. So that's $140 rent increase on the RAD rent. So now, when you do the weighted average rent, the RAD rent is assumed to be $940, and the TPV rent, or the lower of 110% of FMR reasonable rent, at $1,000. Now your weighted contract rent is $976. So you're really close now to that full the full project-based voucher rent that exists within the would exist in the project-based voucher program. Okay, a couple more things on RAD Section 18 blends. First off is some implementation changes. We've had on our website for the last few years basic instructions on how to implement the RAD Section 18 blend. Starts with a RAD application, cover both RAD and Section 18 in the PHA plan, hold the concept call with Office of Recapitalization and identify the blend. Used to be the PHAs then had to do a number of items to make sure they were complying with project-based voucher requirements for attaching a PPV contract to a property. So proposal and project selection procedures, determining whether or not a property could be placed under a HAP contract directly or needed to be under an AHAP, things like that. Those are now unnecessary because all of the units will be under a single RAD form of HAP contract. And so you'd be following the RAD rules for selecting the property and placing the units under HAP contract. Then PHA submits its financing plan with a few other limited Section 18 materials that aren't already covered in our normal RAD financing plan, like the local government letter support. HUD issues the RAD conversion commitment and a Section 18 approval letter. Used to be that then you request TPVs from the field office, and then HUD issues you the TPVs. We're going to actually centralize that as part of the RAD process. And the major reason for this is we were seeing in a lot of cases that PHAs were requesting tenant protection vouchers and weren't requesting enough. They were not requesting enough funding to actually fund the project-based voucher contract, therefore potentially putting their voucher programs at risk. So because we know exactly what your contract rents are going to be, we're going to help usher that along and make sure the request for TPVs comes in the right amount and on time. The PHA then submits its draft closing package to the Office of Recapitalization and goes towards closing once that's approved and executes a RAD HAP contract. It used to be they'd also execute a non-RAD project-based voucher contract or a project-based voucher AHAP. Those aren't necessary anymore. And then you'd complete the rehab or construction just following the RAD rules, not also needing to follow the non-RAD project-based voucher rules. So hopefully this will make things quite a bit simpler to implement. Okay, the last thing to say on RAD Section 18 blends, this isn't actually implemented yet. We've identified some a basic structure to this in the notice, but we'll walk through it anyway. There are some prior RAD Section 18 blends where the PHA converted the public housing assistance to a RAD, project-based rental assistance contract. And then the Section 18 units resulted in tenant protection vouchers that the PHA used to enter into a non-RAD project-based voucher contract. So the PHA had two different kinds of contracts, not just RAD and non-RAD PBV, but a PBRA and a PBV contract on different units at the same property, which has surely been a headache for those PHAs to administer. We have also new statutory authority that allows us to convert that project-based voucher contract to a project-based rental assistance contract in those limited circumstances, right? So we're not talking about a lot of contracts, but making sure that those are requiring that the residents of those project-based voucher units have the same retain the same rights that they had prior to that conversion. We are going to post those instructions about how to do this sometime in the future, and reach out to those PHAs that we already know have properties in this situation, but just flagging it here now for the future. Okay, now I'm going to take a break and turn to Kara Williams-Keefe to cover contract rent adjustments. Kara, you ready?
I am ready. All right. Hi, everyone. All right. Let me just get this up and running. And thanks, Will, for going through all of that stuff. I know it's super technical. I am actually going to go off camera so I can see the presentation a little better, if that works for folks. And actually, I am going to require some technical support from Allie. Allie, do you know how I can get the screen, the PowerPoint presentation to?
You should be able to just at the bottom of your screen with the Zoom icon, just pull up the entire module where you just closed your camera.
Got it. Ah, it is. There we go. So sorry. We are good now. All right. Good afternoon. And I'll be talking about some of the other areas that we have provided some updates and some policy changes within the notice. And so the first one I'm going to talk about is the waivers of rental adjustment by OCAF. And so as I'm sure everybody on this call knows, that the RAD notice limits the contract rent adjustments to HUD's published operating cost adjustment factor. And that is your annual rent increase that you submit for either to your, either to HUD or your contract administrator. And every year you would have your OCAF increase. And the RAD statute permits HUD to adjust rents by an operating cost factor, which allows HUD to consider an alternate to the OCAF. So big case operating cost adjustment factor and lowercase operating cost factor. And so in the supplemental notice, the following changes you'll see. For extraordinary circumstances, a covered project owner may request a waiver of the rental adjustment by the big case OCAF and receive a rental adjustment by an alternate operating cost factor within that initial HAP term. And so for the PBV, for any PBV RAD conversions, these requests would have to be consented to by your contract administrator, just because there are implications to your budget authority and your PBVs. And so HUD will post instructions for these waivers in the upcoming weeks. We will definitely let folks know when those are up and running on the RAD website. And those instructions will detail out exactly what those waiver submissions will look like, what documentation that HUD will need to review, and help outline what that review process will look like. The Office of Recap will grant a waiver if there's good cause, and will also determine what that appropriate alternate operating cost factor adjustment will be, and provide project owners what the resulting rents with that new alternate operating cost factor will look like. Next slide. Okay, and now, the RAD program has now been in existence for, 10 plus years. And so we are creeping up to some of our early RAD conversions hitting their initial HAP contract term. And so the notice goes ahead and outlines how contract rents for RAD converted projects will be adjusted after their initial HAP contract term. So the RAD notice limits those contract rate adjustments that we just talked about to HUD's published OCAF, but it was silent on how those rents would be addressed after your initial term. And so the RAD HAP contracts are required to be renewed at the expiration of each term in perpetuity. And the RAD PBRA contracts are eligible for renewal under Section 524 of the Multifamily Assisted Housing Reform and Affordability Act, MARA. And the supplemental notice goes ahead and makes the following changes. For PBVs, after the first 20 years of the initial or an already extended term, contract rents will be redetermined each year in accordance with the standard PBV regs, and won't be limited to OCAF. For PBRA, after the initial term, which for all the RAD PBRA conversions are 20 years, the renewal contract shall have the contract rents renewed at and set at whatever option a project is eligible for under MARA. So you'll be looking to the Section 8 renewal guide to determine at that point what renewal option your project is eligible for. Next slide. So that tackled the rent questions that have been lingering out there for some time. And now we're just going to talk about some of the updates to the RAD notice that fall under some of our underwriting standards and due diligence requirements. Next slide. Okay, so talk about underwriting standards and requirements. So just some background, and none of this should be a surprise for you guys because we hear from a number of you about, how the market has been shifting over the past several years. So the market has really increased costs to operate your projects. We know across the board that insurance premiums have been skyrocketing, real estate taxes as well, and just to sort of maintain staff has been difficult because salaries and materials have all increased in costs as well. And because of these increased operational costs, coupled with the low RAD rents that projects convert with, we have noticed that, and there's a growing concern that RAD projects are at risk to fall into financial distress. And so we, as we were putting this notice together, we were really looking to revise the underwriting standards to better support financial viability over time. So not just year one, we really want to make sure that over time, the viability of your projects are good. And then the last thing that we tackled was addressing some timing and capacity challenges that have that responsible entities have been experiencing in completing Part 58 reviews. And that has created challenges for PHAs and transactions to move forward in the RAD process. Next slide. So the notice makes the following changes. So we made updates to the underwriting standards and requirements in order to support that financial sustainability of the RAD covered project. So at conversion, projects that are converting without tax credits or any commercial debt, the underwriting will require a 6-month operating reserve. Additionally, we will be checking and making sure that that there is an operating expense coverage of no greater than 80%. So we want to make sure that your operating expenses plus your required replacement reserve deposits don't exceed your gross rent potential by 80%. The other big update that has been made is that we RECAP will be applying Part 50 environmental reviews across the board. So currently Part 50 environmental reviews are only required for PBRA RAD conversions or Part 58 RAD conversions when a responsible entity declines. And due to capacity challenges and the timing issues that we mentioned before, across the board, we'll be doing Part 50 environmental reviews. So Part 58s will no longer be done for RAD conversions. Additionally, this is just sort of a cleanup from the last RAD notice, but our notice will now officially adopt the final rule for the Federal Flood Risk Management Standards, the FFRMS. This has gone into effect as of January 1st, 2025 for all HUD multifamily projects and projects that are undergoing Part 50 reviews. And the new FFRMS rule only impacts new construction or substantially improved structures that are within these newly defined floodplains. So, you know, it will impact some. We have experienced already some projects that have fallen into this, and we've been able to work through them. So it's not something to be scared about or nervous about. The department has been really great in providing trainings and support to our office and to field offices and making sure that we're all responsibly following the new FFRMS requirements. Next slide. Cool. And I think that's it for me at the moment.
Thank you, Kara.
Thank you.
I will come back, finish up a few more slides, and then it looks like our audience has some really great questions. So looking forward to getting to those. We'll walk through a few more items. We've got a few items here, strengthening financial reporting requirements. So you'll see a bunch of language in the RAD supplemental notice that goes into greater detail for PBRA properties on the submission of audited financial statements. This is largely a technicality that we wanted to, that our reference before simply to the regulation in Part 5 needed some buttressing. So we provided additional detail there about the financial submission requirements, but nothing is actually changing. For those many RAD PBRA properties that are submitting their financial statements as they're required to each year, this doesn't actually modify anything you're already doing. For project-based vouchers, noticing that there are sometimes the housing authority or the contract administrator has been more hands-off from the property, and there needing to be some eyes on the financial health of the property. The notice requires that the project-based voucher contract administrator, the housing authority, is regularly confirming that the owner is making deposits into the capital replacement reserve, as well as assessing the financial health of the project. It also gives the PVV contract administrator the ability to request audited financial statements from the owner if they so wish. Going on to the next few items on resident protections and experience. So the notice makes a few discrete changes. First, many probably have noticed a rule HUD published within the last 1 to 2 months around requirement for 30-day notice for non-payment of rent. So the RAD notice makes some conforming changes. We'd actually already, from the very original RAD notice, had aligned the RAD requirement to the public housing requirement, which for a long time had been 14 days, a requirement that residents receive at least 14 days advance notice if there's an adverse action going to be taken as a result of non-payment of rent. So this notice is able to fortunately quickly conform to the new rule and require for both RAD PBV and RAD PBRA properties that residents must be required at least 30 days advance notice. There are a few other requirements we have in here. We have a requirement around some of the leases. We require that lease terms must be reasonable, use plain language, and not conflict with HUD requirements. Our lawyers within HUD review at every single conversion. We review the leases that PHAs and owners are preparing to use once the property converts. And most times these leases are really nice, tidy documents that are in plain language that for a resident to be able to understand their rights and their responsibilities. Sometimes we get some really gnarly stuff, and we just want to make sure that across the board, these leases are in more reasonable terms. So we've required that. Second, there's a prohibition on new security deposits for residents who are in place at the time of conversion. Residents moved in as public housing residents and had satisfied whatever security deposit requirements there were at that time when they moved in. And we don't expect residents should not have to pay additional security deposits just because their property changed subsidy stream from public housing to Section 8. And the notice adds new language protecting pets that are in residence at the time of conversion. That those residents, those pets must be allowed to stay, even if the Section 8 owner is modifying its pets policy. All right, a few more items. HOTMA conforming changes. Okay. Am I still sharing my screen? I'm sorry.
Yes.
Yes. Okay, good. A few months ago, the Office of Public and Indian Housing made a significant regulatory change to 24 CFR Part 983, which is the regulation that governs the project-based voucher program. They added a lot of new provisions, reorganized some things, made changes that complied with Housing and Opportunities through Modernization Act from a few years back. So we have a number of changes in the RAD notice that are really meant to conform the RAD notice to update the waivers and alternative requirements to address the changes in the rule. And because there's new waivers and alternative requirements, this is another one of those areas where it's pending the Federal Register notice publication, but is expected to take effect soon. So some of the things to highlight, though, I think the big picture takeaway is that RAD properties converting through RAD will continue to follow the rules that they had been following under RAD. But let's dive into that a little bit clearer. It makes clear that the work that's conducted pursuant to the RAD note is conducted pursuant to the RAD note. So any rehab or construction that's required as part of the RAD conversion commitment follows the rules of the RAD notice. And wouldn't follow project-based voucher rules that might apply to rehabilitated housing, new construction housing, or existing housing, up until that work is done, of course. This makes one change also on the mod rehab section of the notice. This is the only part of the notice that impacts anything outside of public housing, and waives things so that those properties which qualify as existing housing today can perform the work. While PIH is preparing to implement the requirements for properties that will qualify as rehabilitated housing, we want to make sure the mod rehab properties can continue to do the work that those properties need, even though they're qualifying as existing housing. So again, it's for those properties, it's allowing them to continue to proceed as they had before HOTMA. And then there's a number of updated definitions, regulatory references, some of the descriptions of how we frame the waivers and alternative requirements modified for technical accuracy. So you'll see a lot of changes in there. They are a lot of dotting I's and crossing T's versus substantive changes that significantly change the way that PHAs and their partners have been implementing public housing conversions through that. Okay, and the last thing is we announced this through a RAD blast a few months ago, but just to conform some of the language in the notice, Faircloth, what had been called Faircloth to RAD is now called Restore Rebuild. As many are aware, 2021 HUD rolled out Faircloth to RAD, which offered underwriting certainty to overcome barriers to the development of new, deeply Brindle-assisted units. So we've modified the name to better align with the objectives of the program. We've made these technical changes in the RAD notice. We've also done one relatively small but sometimes important change around when tenant notices need to be provided if a PHA is proposing restore rebuild on a property it doesn't own, that's an existing occupied building without any rental assistance on it today. So where there's market rate residents living at the property, if the prior notice had said really early in the process, you have to issue all the RAD notices to all of these residents, and PHAs were coming back saying there were a lot of barriers to doing that. The current ownership was not welcoming that. And then residents, when they were receiving those notices, were pretty confused because they were market rate residents learning that this property might one day convert under RAD and it may not impact their unit or property, but it wasn't very clear what was going on. So we've modified some of the requirements there to remove some of the confusion and provide some more flexibility. Okay. With that, just to also point out, we've got a new great webpage on Restore Rebuild. We've put up a case study. We've been holding these peer-to-peer learning sessions for PHAs that are anywhere in our pipeline, in our Restore Rebuild pipeline, where they're learning from each other, hearing each other's stories, and trying to find new ways to activate this assistance. So I encourage you to take a look at that. All right, and with that, that's the end of our presentation. I think we can turn to questions now. I'd encourage folks to raise your hand if you've got a question. I know there's lots of questions around rent adjustments and other things like that. And so if anyone wants to be the brave soul to speak up first and ask a few questions, we'll do our best to respond. Okay. Vishna. I apologize if I have mispronounced your name. I see you're the first hand up. All right, Vishna, if you're feel free to come off of mute when you have a chance, but I'll come back to you. Kathy Soroka, would you like to go first?
Hey, thanks, Will. Really appreciate the presentation. Really great job. Really helpful slides. Thank you so much. Question about the RAD Section 18 blends. Can you just go over again? There were some process changes, and you said that the regulatory requirements would not be required. Does that mean that right now folks are sort of submitting two separate applications, or not two separate applications, but supplementing their financing plans with additional submissions? Are you saying that that's all going to be streamlined within recap, and they won't have to do the local government letters and the board approvals and the resident consultation and those other pieces, as well as the separate TPV application. Is that, did I understand that correctly?
Yeah, sorry, Kathy. So yeah, apologies if I misstated something. The Section 18 pieces that you referenced would still need to happen. So we still need to do those extra things that are required for HUD to complete the Section 18 application. What HUD does is we take all the things you give us in the RAD financing plan, which includes things like an environmental review and things of that nature, and we share that with the Special Application Center behind the scenes, so you don't have to do it. But then there's some things that aren't part of the financing plan that are required legally for HUD to issue a Section 18 approval letter, like the local governmental support letter. So you would still need to do those things. It's the items related to entering into the PBV contract, where you'll just need to focus on following the RAD requirements for entering into the PBV contract. And won't have to do the other items around determining whether it's doing the inspections to determine whether it qualifies as existing housing or another type of housing. Some of the additional administrative plan items there would be required.
And can you, while you're talking about that, where does the TPV application fit in? Is that something that's, because I know that's tripped up a bunch of folks that they didn't necessarily know they had to apply for TPVs or when or how to do that piece.
So we'll build that into our closing process so that as we issue the RCC, we'll also say, all right, whether we need to collect an additional piece of paper from the housing authority or not, we'll figure out based on the contract rents, you're going to need 60 new tenant protection vouchers. And the subsidy that you'll need based on the specific contract rents at the property is $1,000 per tenant protection voucher, which may be different from the housing authority's PUC or their per unit cost in their normal voucher program, which is HUD's default for when they issue tenant protection vouchers. So the PHA will both get a reminder and be be kind of shepherded along in terms of making sure the vouchers are requested. As well as making sure the amount of the assistance is the right amount to fund the contract.
Awesome, thank you.
Sure, thanks, Kathy. Okay, I think the next up was Jonathan.
Hi, thanks for the presentation and taking my question here. On the Section 18 blend program, you referenced them as tenant protection vouchers. And so do those vouchers require that the residents at the time of conversion elect to project-based that voucher, or is it automatically project-based?
No, the tenant does not need to consent to the project basing of the voucher. The housing authority can determine on its own to project base that assistance. And in a blend, there won't need to be any process around that. The PHA won't need to have determined that they're going to project base that voucher. It will just be handled like any other RAD conversion. You meet the requirements for the RAD conversion. The property will be eligible then to be placed under a project-based voucher contract. And your work with the residents will be around planning for the conversion, any rehab, signing the new leases, any relocation that might be necessary. The actual the substance of that.
Great, thank you.
Sure. All right, Courtney.
Thanks, Will, and thanks for the presentation. This has been super helpful. I have a few sort of logistical questions. First, for the blended HAP, do you anticipate using the same RAD HAP that you currently have, or will you be issuing a new form?
We'll use the same HAP contract. There will need to be some changes to at least one section. Well, for purposes of the blend, the section that covers funding in the year of conversion will need to be modified because there actually will be TPV assistance funding that's flowing. So we're working on that. We expect that to be ready in a week and a half.
Oh, great. That's awesome. And then for the blends, in terms of like doing the calculation, would you expect that to be done at sort of the CHAP issuance stage, or when would you expect to have those numbers ready?
We will be posting right now. A property is doesn't identify that it will be a blend until a concept call. So what we do now is we issue the CHAP with normal RAD rents after application, and we then only at concept call modify the CHAP once the PHA says, oh, this is a blend. That's probably going to continue to be the model, but look forward to any feedback on that. We're also going to be preparing, we publish the RAD rents right now that says what the RAD rents are if you're just converting the public housing assistance. We'll publish more helpful materials that shows here's what your rents would be if you did this kind of blend. Here's or that kind of blend, et cetera, so that it's much easier. So you don't have to do the math. There might be things we need you to confirm. We'll need the PHA's determination of the reasonable rent and things like that. But we'll have a good starting point for what the rent would be, and then we'll need to verify a few things with the PHA.
Okay, great. Then with respect to there, you'll see in the chat, there's a lot of chat about the change to Part 50. But one of my questions is, will you be able to offer any kind of transition period for projects that are already in the works with that they have a Part 58 or in the process of obtaining a Part 58?
Short answer is yes. The longer answer, I'll pass it on to Kara.
Yeah, yes. And we are working with our partners in PIH and OEE to sort of see where that cutoff is if you already have a Part 58 underway. And so we'll have that answered and sent out relatively shortly on what that cutoff date is. But yeah, no, we acknowledge that stuff is already under review and we're not going to penalize folks for that.
Okay. And my last question, I promise, is probably for you, Kara, but you were talking about the adjustment that'll take that we can do for the PBV HAPs upon the end of the initial term.
Mm-hmm.
But the notice languages references the 20-year mark, and we do have some HAPs that have a 15-year initial term. So will it be whatever the actual initial term is, or only after year 20?
So, Will, do you want to take that one?
Yeah. So it'll be, the short answer, Courtney, is it'll be the 20-year mark. And part of the complexity there is we know there's some housing authorities that when they converted, they entered into a 15 or 20-year contract and they immediately extended it. So there's some RAD PBB HAP contracts out there that have a 35-year term, 40-year term. So we didn't want to penalize somebody by saying just, at the end of their initial term, because for some folks that would mean waiting a long time. We also didn't want the disparate treatment with the PBRA contracts. So while we know some have a 15-year or 17-year term, we just made it uniform at 20 years.
Okay, great. Thank you very much for your time. I'll let someone else go in with their questions.
Thanks, Courtney. Hey, Jen. Jen, I see you've come off mute, but I can't hear you if you're talking.
Okay, is that any better?
Yes, we got you.
Okay, I'm sorry about that. Just a quick question, please, on the RAD Section 18 blends, wherein the RAD PBRA HAP contract will be utilized. Does the project basing of the TPVs take on any different process for the housing authority? I did hear you say to Kathy that will all happen at closing and follow current RAD rules. But will that look any different than previous TPV to PBV processing?
Yeah, so I should have been clear in the Kathy response that if they're going to RAD project-based voucher contract, right, for all the assistance is converting to RAD project-based vouchers, we'll take care of making sure that the tenant protection voucher funds, the new funding increment that's provided to the housing authority is appropriately sized and gets there on time. We'll work with the PHA to make sure that happens. If it's going to project-based rental assistance, there is no role for the housing authority as contract administrator, and HUD doesn't actually issue the TPV funds in a normal way. We have this authority now to actually move the money over to HUD's project-based rental assistance account, and we'll just be obligating the money to the contract. We'll be placing the money on the contract directly, since it's a contract directly between HUD and the owner. So there's nothing. There's no role at all for the housing authority to play there. HUD will just be handling it kind of behind the scenes.
Okay. Thank you, Will, and thanks to you and Kara.
Sure. Thanks, Jen. Let me pause. Visna, if you're still there and you want to ask your question, go for it. Give you another chance. Oh, there you go. All right, I think you're unmuted. Nope. Okay, we'll go on to Michael Ryan.
Good afternoon. Thank you for that presentation. For the operating expense ratio, that it must be no greater than 80% for projects without LIHTC or commercial debt. Does that mean if the operating expense ratio is above 80% that the project would qualify for a higher rent increase?
So you're referring to the requirement that for ongoing conversions, if there's a financing plan submitted to us that doesn't involve tax credits or debt, what's the minimum? We require that the operating expense ratio be no greater than 80%, right?
Okay, got it.
So this isn't about it's not about the rent adjustments. This is more just our underwriting standards for a conversion.
Okay, gotcha. Okay, thank you very much.
Zach.
Hi, yes, thank you for the presentation. I know a lot of PHAs similar to us who are early adopters of RAD, been eager to have this come out, so I appreciate all the work you guys have done. I did have a question about, are there, as far as submitting the waivers go for alternative cost adjustment factors, does the Office of Recap have like limitations on how many waivers you can approve in a year, or like dollar limitations on, total amount that's going to, because essentially I assume this impacts the congressional budget or things. Are there limitations around that you guys have to abide by?
Thanks, Zach. There's not a specific limitation on how many we can approve. Obviously, whatever we do needs to be based on if there's budget authority. So there might be a time where somebody gives us a very legitimate scenario, and we have to say, can't fund it right now, but if you wait 2 months or something along those lines. But that's not the case at the moment. And also importantly, on the funding side for project-based vouchers, we don't have new money to give to a housing authority to fund this. So if a housing authority that's administering a project-based voucher contract is requesting a rent adjustment, they would need to have the resources within their reserves, which we know at this time is really tight. So that could definitely be a constraint at this time.
Okay, thank you. And lastly, if approved for a waiver, how soon would that be able to be like in effect where we could actually start seeing revenue change or, putting, yeah.
Barry, you want to take it?
Sure. I think the short answer is a lot of those details are still being worked out, whether it would have to be go into effect either at your contract renewal date or if it could be implemented immediately. But we are working through those questions, and I think as we sort of alluded to earlier, we'll be putting together like the process, the requirements, and the guidance that will answer all of those questions. We'll be publishing those in like the next few weeks on the HUD RAD website. So we have limited information other than we can do it, which is great. And then those details will be given out a little later.
Great, thank you. Would certainly advocate for sooner availability than later when it comes to putting it
Yeah.
into play. Yeah, I understand you have limitations as well. So thank you.
Yep. No, thank you.
Veronica.
Okay, hi, Will. I am a post-converted authority. We converted in September of 23, so I've just reached my first year for my new HAP contract, and I did a blend, and it's been a challenge. So I'm open to this idea of consolidating, but I need to know that the money is going to make sense. I understand you to say you will do the calculations and then you'll reach out to the housing authorities that have converted to see if this will work. And my question is, do I have the option not to do the consolidation if the money isn't going to work? Because I needed those 71 vouchers of my PBV to cover the debt that I have in my RAD rehab.
Yep. So if most of what we talked about with the blend so far is really going forward, right? The blends that haven't yet been executed and signed. The looking back part was primarily for or was exclusively for properties where you might have a RAD PBRA contract and a regular project-based voucher contract. And Veronica, I don't remember, was that your situation?
No, I have a RAD PBRA and an AHAP for my other units.
RAD PBRA and an AHAP?
Yes.
Oh, okay. So you would qualify. Yeah. Right. It'll be optional. So you could look at whatever we come out with and say, never mind. And B, I don't, certainly the goal of it is not to, not to detract from your revenue that you were anticipating and needing for the property. So thanks for flagging yourself for us, and we'll be in contact as we have some more details on it.
All right, thank you.
Thanks, Michael.
May I speak? I'm so sorry that you kept calling on me.
Yeah.
My name's Christina, and I use my colleagues link, even though I registered myself. My apologies. I just wanted clarification with regard to the Section 8 renewals after the 20-year expiration. I see that option 1 is mark up to market. Is that an option for, yeah, is that one of the options? My question, the core of it is what are the implications for rent of tenants after the 20-year expiration? Will it go up?
The tenant rents will stay the same.
Yeah.
They'll still be under a Section 8 contract and still be in unit covered under a Section 8 contract. They'll still have their lease. They'll still have the same protections. So no impact on the resident. The only impact, or the primary impact, will be on their contract rents. And yeah, we expect, Carrie, you might know this a little bit better, so let me know if I get this wrong, but we expect most properties to qualify for either an option 1 or option 2 renewal under MARA, which both provide contract rents being set up to the comparable market rent.
Yes, after the initial 20-year term. Yep. That's pretty much the standard of what most sort of operating multifamily projects can renew under. But yeah, and the tenant rents remain the same. Those don't change.
Oh, so basically the property owner gets to increase their rent and receive more funding, essentially.
Exactly.
Okay, thank you for clarifying.
Okay, Julia.
Hey, so we are working on 3 different RAD conversions at our housing authority right now. Each of them are between the CHAP and the RCC. And so a lot of this is talking about going forward. So is that going forward with new CHAPs or with new RCCs? Like, do we need to adjust what we are actively doing on our projects as we are awaiting RCC?
So in general, if you haven't converted yet, you can take advantage of the new blends and things of that nature. So for the most part, because you haven't converted, the notice applies to you. There are some things around underwriting requirements, like the Part 50 reviews and things like that, where they're phasing in based on where you are in the transaction. So of course, if we had issued a RAD conversion commitment and you're 3 weeks away from closing, we're not going to force you back into underwriting. And as was asked earlier, and Kara responded, if you've reached a certain stage in some of the environmental due diligence as part of a Part 58 environmental review, we're not going to make folks take steps backwards. So for some of those things, it's a little bit more nuanced, and we'll work with you to make sure it's not a painful transition.
And is this something that we talk to our HUD rep if we have specific questions about?
Yeah, I'd reach out to you. I don't know if you have a RAD transaction manager assigned to you yet. That would be the right person. If not, reach out to rad@hud.gov, and we'll set up some time with you.
Thank you.
Sure. Okay. Stacy.
Yeah, thank you so much for the presentation. For small PHAs now, when they convert, there's a good reason to not close out the public housing program, right? Since now they can preserve their fair cloth authority. Is that correct for the Section 18 units?
That's correct.
The 90%, which is great news. And I think I see here, unfortunately, if a PHA has converted all its units under Section 18 and RAD, it cannot request that authority retroactively. If it had a conversion like a year ago, can it ask HUD if it would consider, and it didn't close out its PHA program, could it ask HUD for the units that were Section 18? Could they ask for fair cloth?
Yeah, those should still show up on. You asked HUD, you asked your local field office, or I don't know if HUD's posted an updated list on our website of your fair cloth units. Those Section 18 units if you took some units out through Section 18 last year, they should still show up on your fair cloth list. And you'd still be able to use restore rebuild to bring them back.
Great news, thank you.
Michael.
Thank you for the presentation, and thank you to the entire Office of Recap for pushing this through. As an early RAD adopter with low RAD rents, we've been waiting for this for a long time, and really appreciate that you've listened to us and heard us and have responded. My question is pretty simple, and that is with the waiver for the alternative OCAF. What is the timeline that you expect that we'll have instructions on how to do that, and how soon we can submit that waiver?
Sure, we're going to be turning to that very quickly in the next few weeks. I know there's a number of housing authorities that have already given us a good amount of information. So in some cases, we might just be coming back to you for a few more things. And then for others who are just finding out about this now and that haven't previously reached out to us, hopefully the instructions be helpful for figuring out what exactly needs to be provided. But we appreciate, I know lots of folks on this call have been really helpful in providing us information, justification, which has helped inform the policy in the first place. So appreciate all of that work and your patience in this. And we know 2025 is going to be a busy year for us. Kathy.
Great, thanks, Will. I have another question regarding the Part 50 review and then the environmental review. I think I saw in the notice, and I'm not sure if you mentioned, if there are multiple phases to the project, you're contemplating like a phase 2 next year or a phase 3, right down the line. Does the Part 50 have to incorporate those additional phases?
Kara.
Yeah, so the rules around both Part 50 and Part 58, they're the same, that if you have a multi-phase development and you know what those phases are going to look like, that you include all those phases in a single Part 50 review upfront. And the reason for this is that it allows an owner or a PHA to more quickly move through the approval process at those later phases. You won't be waiting on a Part 50 to be completed. It also saves you money on having to do all new reports and all of that. So as much as you know about your phasing and what's going to be happening in each phases, it's always better and recommended, same across 58s and 50s, so that it's not really changing, that they all be included up front in a single Part 50. We know that's tough sometimes when you've got like really large projects that are complicated and you don't have things all worked out, and that's fine. We can deal with those on a separate basis as they move forward, but it's always it's just easier for everybody and more efficient if we can do it up front in a single one.
Yeah, thank you. I do think that in more cases than not, I think those later phases are, I guess sort of the question is sort of where's the line? It's a bit of a gray area. I think in more cases than not, folks tend to, focus phase by phase because there tends to be a lot to be done within one phase, and engaging environmental and vendors and people for the different phases can get complicated. So I think there might be some gray area there that folks may have questions about and may need to work with you on.
Sure thing. Yep.
Okay, I see folks' hands have gotten tired. There are no hands up. I know there's been a lot of chatter in the chat box. So if we haven't gotten to you there, I'd encourage you to raise your hand so we can hear the full question.
I think I see Shannon's hand raised.
Yes.
Ahead,
hello. In reference to the TOA and releasing the DOT, this all has to do with environmental review, and releasing the DOT on the existing site, can the owner elect to wait to do that, or do they need to do it as part of the transfer to the new site?
So the policy has been that if you want to release the DOT on that existing site, the environmental review has to be completed at closing. You can release the DOT later once you do once you do your environmental review, but we can't release the DOT without that done on the originating site.
Okay, but it won't keep the transfer from happening if it's not released.
Nope, the DOT will just stay on the originating site.
Great, thank you.
And Kara, in that case, if they don't do it at closing and they do the environmental review later on, can they still do it through release the DOT through RAD, or do they have to go through Section 18 at that point?
To release the DOT at that point?
Yeah, afterwards, if it's afterwards.
Yeah, it's a post-conversion request, and it comes through the post-closing request inbox on the RAD resource desk, and Tamika's team handles those releases as well.
Perfect, thank you. I didn't expect to be asking questions myself here. That's great.
Yeah, it's just tracked as we actually put that requirement as an additional provision within the RCC, and so it's just tracked that way.
Thanks, Kara. Michael.
Yeah, I just have a simple question, and I don't know if it's been thought through yet. But have you thought about what extraordinary circumstances are going to be? Because we are watching as a number of RAD projects have been absolutely crushed by soaring insurance costs, and also the fact that a lot of our residents stopped paying rent during the pandemic, and we've not recovered from that because those residents either moved out or never have any intention of paying that rent due to certain state rules. Would those be covered in the extraordinary circumstances for an adjustment?
Thanks, Michael. So, right, we haven't exactly defined what is covered or not covered by extraordinary, but at a very basic meaning, it's things that were not anticipated at the time of conversion. Obviously, we're aware of the significant spike in insurance costs and some other costs around the country that were certainly not anticipated years ago. So. We at this time are not encouraging anyone to limit. If you have properties that are underwater, right, that are really struggling, and you've been having to feed, or you've been having to cut the expenses significantly and cut off services, those are properties we need to work with. What it'll we still need to determine what the process is, what how many we can get to, how to prioritize all of that. But I wouldn't. We definitely encourage you to keep properties in line for this if they're legitimately struggling and underwater.
Well, hopefully you guys will see your way clear to recognize that these are the biggest pains.
Thanks, Malcolm. Okay, Don.
Hi, thank you so much for this. I appreciate it. Just a couple questions for you. One is involving the Faircloth. There may be some hesitancy from our board to try to maintain that flexibility to develop more later. Is there a time limit as to how long you have to utilize those that number again?
That is a good question. I don't know if anybody in our Restore Rebuild team is on that has been closer to this question. We've certainly seen PHAs that have converted or taken out through Section 18 their last public housing units a few years ago and have been able to rebuild those. There's been no issue, and one as recently as, or that's not had public housing for 10 years, been able to do so. But we'll need to look into a little bit. So there's nothing clearly written down or how to say that there is a specific time frame or statute of limitations on which, by which you have to rebuild. And the act of closing out your public housing program is proactive in that it doesn't, the housing authority and the board have to do things to close out a public housing program. It doesn't just happen because, by your inactivity. If your board is still deciding whether or not to build more units, that's probably a different question than is the housing authority actively trying to close out its public housing program?
Okay, and then another question that I had for you involves the nonprofits. We're so new to all of this. We just received our approval letter. When do you utilize your nonprofit? Is there any guidance for those nonprofits on what their requirements are going to be if they do go into receivership of some of the properties?
Requirements around what?
So our nonprofit board is they're very concerned if they are brought into the RAD equation, what their responsibilities are going to be as far as like who would be responsible for the properties, how do they pick that person, what's their liability, that type of thing.
It sounds like maybe we benefit from a separate conversation where we can maybe go into more detail. Would you mind just dropping your through direct message, dropping your contact info or something, and we'll
okay, I'll do that. Great, thank you.
Thanks, Don. Kenzie.
Hi, Kenzie Bach from Boston. I was wondering if you could just walk through a little bit, and I know we're all asking you questions that eventually will become clear for us, but just when we go from the 2 contracts to 1, obviously we're going from a world where it's OCAF on the RAD side, but you know, a rent adjustment in the PBV. Sorry, we mainly do PBV blend. So I'm just trying to think through, you know, obviously from a financing perspective, the higher TPV ratios on the Section 18 blends are great, but I'm trying to understand, you know, it sounds like if the whole contract is now under OCAF, there isn't going to be quite the sort of market testing dynamic of the rent adjustments and the PBV contract side now. So just wondered if you could speak to that a little bit more.
Yeah, that's correct. That with all of the units going under one contract with higher contract rents, they'll be subject to the OCAF adjustments after conversion. Yeah.
And so it would be the same whether it's a PBRA or PBV blend.
That's right.
Got it. Okay. All right. Thank you.
Michael, you have another one? You might be the last question. Or was that your old hand? Okay. Well, that might be it for questions today, but I'm sure you will all have more questions in the future, which is great. Reach out to us at rad@hud.gov. If you know our personal work emails, feel free to do that too. We love hearing from folks. Tell us if we broke anything, but hopefully these provide some helpful tools. We'll have the slides and this recorded training up probably sometime next week. HUD's had some weird issues with our website all week, so we haven't been able to get things up ahead of time. So apologies for that. But this will all be available next week, and then we hope to develop, as you've mentioned, some other helpful tools and guidance on environmental reviews, on the RAD Section 18 blends, on the rent adjustments that we encourage you to pay attention to, so you can take advantage of them. Thank you very much. Hope you all have a great Friday, great weekend.